Everybody. Thanks for having me. I would love to just kind of start off with the reasons why I wrote this book, my goals in doing so, and here is Supermaker. Um, so really, gosh, thinking back to when I started my company, this was 2010 in Portland. I didn't have a plan to start a business. But it quickly developed into one. I recognized the opportunity in the market. I went with it. I scaled the company over 7 years. Next thing you know, I'm sold to Unilever. And so it was a whirlwind of experiences and learning and so much wisdom gained. And I realized, after the acquisition that I had a lot to share. And there was a whole community of makers and entrepreneurs that would really benefit from my story. Maybe I hadn't considered myself the traditional businesswoman, but I ran this huge company, leading a team of 150 employees and scaling to the acquisition. And so I thought, if I can do it, others can do it too. And I wanted that to be, the real message in my story is that entrepreneurship really can be for everybody. And so in doing that, I tell the story of the inspiration behind starting Schmidt's, everything that, led up to that throughout my career. And I'll get into that in a little bit. And then also throughout the book, really just all the lessons learned in scaling, all the things that went wrong, and just mishaps and the wins and the accomplishments and just all of it in the book, with a lot of takeaway tangible business lessons. And it was really important for me in sharing these lessons to make sure that I had stories to back up everything I was teaching. I know there's a lot of business books out there that'll tell you, you have to do X, Y, and Z. But with my book, I might tell you that, but I'm also going to share stories, from my own experience that'll back up that advice and really tell you why it's important. And I'm really happy to say, since the book launched 3 weeks ago, I've been hearing from entrepreneurs who are telling me that the book is truly an inspiration to them. It's giving them wisdom that they never, knew that they needed. And it's, more importantly, it's just giving people the confidence to move forward with their business. And it's just so rewarding to me. And so I'm happy to say, mission accomplished in writing this. I do want to share a couple of testimonials that I've received recently. I'll start with this. This person says, as a new entrepreneur, I'm so thankful to have come across Jaime Schmidt's latest book, Supermaker. It's the Bible and bullshit firsthand account you need to read if you're looking to create a business, brand, or venture all your own. Sorry for the language. Next review that came in just a few days ago. This is the most honest and helpful entrepreneurship book I've read. I've read many good ones that I put into practice, but this is the first one that moves away from the theory and provides practical tips in the most honest and transparent way. It's so real. So these are the kind of testimonials that really inspire me to keep getting the book out there and just to know that I'm really having impact. Let's see here. I think I want to talk a bit about the writing process. So this is something that was new for me. I've spent 7 years building a business. I never put much thought into being an author. But once I made that decision and recognized, the real value in my story, I was excited and I dove all in. And one of the first things I did was go through all my old emails from day one of building my business, and found some real gems in there that were, true snippets of information that were important for me and remembering parts of my story. And that process in itself was just so rewarding, mostly just to see how much I had grown as a business person, as just a human. And so that was really cool. And then from there, just realizing, over 7 years, how much I had been through and just how much, persistence and risk tolerance that I had. And so it was really important for me in writing the story that, that message came through, that those are two attributes that are really, truly critical for building a business. I'm going to read a bit of chapter 1 just to give you sort of a peek into how the book starts. Okay, so chapter 1 is called Don't Quit the Quest. Seek out your thing and you'll know when you found it. I had no idea what I was doing. I was 31 years old, 8 months pregnant, in a wonderful but still very new relationship, and working a job that didn't suit me. Mostly, I was in a rush to figure out who I was, and quickly, before beginning my new, unexpected role of mother. So there I was, stirring up my first batch of deodorant in the kitchen of my tiny rental in Portland. From the moment I started making, that kitchen was a disaster. The oils and butters gunked up every surface, and the sink was a few days away from being completely clogged. There were crumpled up papers of discarded recipes and notes littered across the counter. Essential oils and samples of my latest test batches cluttered every inch of surface space available, alongside my jars of homemade kombucha and hot sauce. My feet ached from standing, and I was already tired after long days at my full-time job. As I stirred, bigger questions swirled around my head. Am I ready to be a mother? Should I stay in this job? Will we have enough money? And an old familiar one, what's my purpose? So this was the earliest days of starting Schmidt's. And there's a lot really that led up to that moment of me making deodorant in my kitchen. I'll back up a bit to, I guess, the earliest years of my life. So I grew up in Michigan in a tiny little tourist town. It's called Frankenmuth. I would love to hear if anybody has heard of Frankenmuth. And it was a small town, and everybody knew each other. And a natural path for many of the people that lived in that town was to go to a Big Ten university. And I ended up at Michigan State. One of the reasons I chose that too was because my brother went there. My parents offered to pay for it, so it just made sense. Throughout college, though, I never really knew what I wanted to do. I chose business as my degree, partly because my brother had done it. And it seemed practical enough. And also nothing else really spoke to me. And so I got the degree, went through the motions. Next thing you know, I graduated, and I found myself working for a staffing company, recruiting and hiring. I had an emphasis on human resources with my degree. So I was doing the work. I got some pretty decent jobs pretty early on in the career, had a nice salary, some good benefits. I actually was working for the MacArthur Foundation in Chicago a couple of years after graduation. But nothing was speaking to me. It just didn't feel right. I know a lot of people might have felt comfortable in that situation, just grateful to have the job, and I was truly very grateful. But at the same time, I knew there was more for me, but I just didn't know what it was. So I had moved across the country from Chicago to Portland, Oregon, and I told myself that I had 1 year to figure it out. So I got my job in HR at Portland Public Schools, did that for the year, and as promised to myself, I quit. And then at that moment, I thought, all right, well, now what? I didn't have any clear answers. I tried a few things. I drove across the country on this soul-searching road trip, thinking I would come back with all the answers. And I came back and, relaxed and inspired, but still sort of confused. And so I took a couple classes. I tried sewing. I did some interior design. I did wood carving, and none of it was just feeling right. I even tried a job at a hot dog shack, thinking, all right, this, at least it's work where I can spend my time thinking and, not really stressing out, but, making hot dogs and thinking about my next move. That didn't last too long because it was greasy and sweaty and the hours were terrible. So next, I got a job working with kids at a residential facility that had mental and behavioral health issues. That work was rewarding in the sense that, I was out of the office working, directly with people and having impact. The pay was incredibly low, but I could see that I was at least affecting lives. But the next thing you know there, I met my husband. His name's Chris Cantino. We were working together with these children, fell in love. I got pregnant pretty early on, and then I had my whole life ahead of me and wondered what was next. There was an evening where I was working in the office there, and I started Googling classes in Portland. Still, very pregnant, but still feeling sort of unsettled and just very happy to be a mom soon, but also at the same time thinking my time's running out. I need to figure this out. So I took a class that night on how to make shampoo. And it was in somebody's kitchen in Portland, a really tiny little kitchen. There were about 10 people there. And we started making these shampoos on our stovetop, on the instructor's stovetop. And I immediately was just really inspired and really intrigued and wanting to do more. So the minute I got home, I decided to make it my mission to keep making personal care products. My lifestyle at the time was very DIY. We were on a strict budget with social worker salaries. I loved making things like kombucha. We were growing herbs, making hot sauces, and so it fit my lifestyle. Still not recognizing the business potential yet. But also being pregnant, it made sense for me to be using clean, healthy products on my body. 8 months pregnant at the time, so very, very pregnant. So I bought a bunch of books, started making all sorts of things like lotions and sunscreens and soaps and deodorants, and really was enjoying it and decided to start taking my products out to farmers markets. So at this point, my baby had been born. He was just a few months old. And during his nap times, I would work in the kitchen right outside his bedroom, making my products. And then on the weekends, he and I would go to the market. I'd bring a playpen. My husband was working weekends, so I had to bring the baby. And we would set up our booth, and Oliver, my son, and I would sell. And he was adorable, so people were excited to come see him at the booth. This is usually a time when I would stop and ask for questions. I think I'll do that. I'm going to check the chat because I know I'm rambling and I have a lot more to say. Let's see what's going on in the chat. Oh, okay. How to sell a product in other countries. I will get to that, Joe. That'll come a little bit later. So thanks for the question. I'll definitely come back to it. So going from farmer's market to this brand that 7 years later was acquired by Unilever, so much had happened along the way. And I'd like to read an excerpt from my book to sort of give a little more perspective there. Actually, I'm going to back up just a bit to one of my, the job I talked about when I was working in Portland public schools, and just this feeling of kind of unsettled, not knowing what work I wanted to do. And it was just really interesting when one of my colleagues had noticed this in me too. And I want to read that part to you. I found a job with Portland Public Schools giving orientations to new teachers and administering their benefits packages, working alongside a small group of primarily female coworkers. Our desks were practically within arm's reach of each other, so we'd get talking about our lives, friendly chatter to pass the time. One day, one of my colleagues looked at me warmly and said, "This job is so not you." She didn't mean it in a critical way, and I wasn't offended. It was validating to know that someone else had sensed my internal confusion. So there you have it. It wasn't just me. So I'm going back to the farmers market days and how the company really scaled. And, from the minute I sold my first deodorant, I recognized there was a real need for what I was making. I was hearing from customers who were saying the product had changed their lives. They hadn't found a natural deodorant that had worked for them. They were loving my fragrance combinations. And so I understood that what I was making was, had real potential, not just beyond, personal interest for me. So from there, I started selling into retailers locally in Portland. Next thing you know, Schmidt's is sold internationally. Fast forward just a few years and we were in stores like Target, Costco, Walmart. But there was so much that went into that. I continued to make my products in-house. I know a lot of products businesses will end up outsourcing their production, working with a co-packer. But for me, I decided to keep my manufacturing in-house. So everything that came along with that, that meant buying equipment, hiring a huge team, and building out, these major production lines. And so much to learn along the way, and opportunity for so many things to go wrong. And they did. And the book goes really deep into some of these obstacles and setbacks and everything I've learned from that. Sorry, my cat's down here making some noise. I do want to read a part about just this feeling of being afraid of failure when you're so deep into a business and you're loving what you're doing, you see the potential, you're getting positive feedback from customers, but you're still afraid. Is this the right thing? Did I make the right choice in putting my whole self into this business? So I'm fast forwarding here to this part when I really started thinking about fear and what that looked like to me, and everything that I was sort of putting on the line with growing this business. Every decision I made came with the risk that it could be the wrong choice. While the thought wasn't pleasant, I had to accept that failure was possible and move forward anyway. There was no other way to grow. Each step I took to get to the next level required taking a risky leap, then trusting that I'd be able to figure it out. If we have any entrepreneurs in the audience, I'm sure we can all relate to this feeling of having to trust yourself and this sort of hope that it will all work out. Unfortunately for me, it did. It doesn't always, and I was prepared for that. one of the biggest risks was, just the financial one. Fast forward it a bit in my book here to this part about a big surprise one day. One morning I woke up, checked my phone, groggy-eyed in bed, and saw an email from my accountant that I owed around $300,000 in personal income taxes. As the owner of the business, I had to pay taxes on earnings I wasn't necessarily bringing home. Even though Schmidt's revenues were higher than ever, almost all the money coming in went right back out in operating expenses. So at times, our margin of profit was slim. In other words, I simply did not have the money to pay this tax bill. I filed for an extension and prayed everything would go smoothly as Schmidt's expanded. This kind of risk was unbearable. If I stopped to dwell on it, this kind of risk was unbearable if I stopped to dwell on it. But I knew if I could just tolerate it for the time being, we'd get to the other side. Our projections were solid. I needed to hustle to keep them that way. So we're talking not just financial pressure, but the pressure that comes with balancing a new family, making time for friends, cooking, exercise. And then, competition, that's a huge part of growing any business. And I won't get into too much detail, but I have a whole chapter on just competition in itself and what that looks like. Starting my business, I came into the industry when natural products were just sort of starting to become, I guess, trendy. At the time, though, they were still very much a niche customer. But my goal was to make natural products available to the mainstream. So that meant getting into retailers like Target, Walmart, Costco, who weren't yet, carrying these types of brands. So with that came competition on a really intense level. I ended up competing with some of these heritage beauty brands that have been around for ages. You think Secret, Dove, Axe deodorant. I learned a lot along the way, and even ran into some potential legal mishaps. You get your first legal letter, then you've really made it in a business, and that people are starting to pay attention. So I'm fast forwarding. I can't wait for everybody to jump in and just get the nitty gritty of all of it. But we don't have time to get too deep. So fast forward to 2017, I heard from Unilever. If you're not familiar with who Unilever is, they are the world's largest consumer products companies. They make some of their own lines and they acquire other brands. They were interested in acquiring Schmidt's. They recognized that we were really taking a huge piece of market share in the deodorant category, and they wanted a part of it. And it was really clear that a brand like that can't necessarily, or a company like that can't necessarily compete with a brand like Schmidt's that started in the kitchen, that has a really indie loyal customer following. So rather than competing and trying to make the product themselves, they wanted to acquire the brand. For me, this was really interesting on many levels. When I first started, I had no intentions of even growing a business as large as it had become. And it had become such a crucial part of who I was as a person that selling the company seemed a little, I guess, scary in many ways, mostly because of my identity and what did that mean for me going forward. But there was some clear opportunity in doing so. I knew that I would have access to greater consumer insights. I would gain distribution channels that Schmidt's otherwise wouldn't have access to. So the benefits were really clear, and I knew it was the right time for me, even financially. Schmidt's never raised money as we were growing, but we were very strapped for cash at this time. It was a big year for us. We had launched across a number of retail chains, so the timing was good. The book goes into detail on the whole diligence process and what that means, what it looks like to negotiate during an acquisition, and just paints a whole picture of that, of the night that it all went down. I was in New York City in a conference room, up all night, literally signed the deal after getting no sleep. And so that's a fun chapter. That's chapter 11 in the book. So I'm gonna pause I'm gonna address Joe's question here. So selling products in other countries. This was something that that Schmidt's did pretty early, actually. I had interest from a retailer overseas that I never was anticipating, but once I got that interest, I thought, wow, there's real opportunity to sell and expand this brand internationally. So it's not easy. There's a lot that goes into it. You have to think about, the packaging requirements can be different. You have to go through safety assessments and testing. Some countries have certain ingredients they don't allow. There might be some language that you have to change on your labels and certain claims that can or should be made. And so it's something that I definitely suggest. I know a lot of people are opposed to international business or expansion because it is intimidating, but there was real opportunity there for Schmidt's, and it really helped us grow quickly. And you think about a product like deodorant, gaining traction overseas, and it just seems pretty amazing that, that people will go through the work to import a product like deodorant for their customers, but they just didn't have anything like Schmidt's at the time, and so it was something that they really wanted. A number of countries, mostly Europe. I'd like to talk a little about what I'm doing now before I get too deep into questions, but I'm still working with Schmidt's. We're 3 years after the acquisition. I'm still working as the brand spokesperson. I'll always be connected as the founder. Just really happy with the way the partnership has gone and just the way the team has stayed intact and really the mission and the values of Schmidt's. I also have started an investment fund since then. It's called Color. My goal there is really to support underrepresented entrepreneurs, specifically women and people of color. I started this with my husband, Chris, who was also with me with Schmidt's. We just saw an opportunity to put money in the hands of entrepreneurs who otherwise don't have it. This was about 3 years ago, before it became a trend to support underrepresented people. And so we're really proud that that was at the forefront of our thinking with our fund. Also have a media company called Supermaker, which was mentioned earlier, same name as my book. The goal for that is to really be a resource for entrepreneurs and makers to put out content that's useful for people building brands. It's been great during COVID-19 because we put out content that can be really helpful. We also had an entrepreneurial dream project that we created, which was a grant program and mentor network for entrepreneurs who are building during COVID-19. So we have a lot of other initiatives that we're working on. The book is really where most of my attention is on now, but there's more to come. And I've been talking a lot, so I'd love to hear from people who might have any questions.
Well, thank you, Jaime, for your overview behind your book and your history. I think it's a fantastic story, and it's a little non-traditional, especially from the first chapter about everything you've done from HR, education, little interior design. I just think that's really fascinating how, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to go to a 4-year school, get a bachelor's degree in business, and then, do that. You can have a successful, but it's about finding what is for you and finding what that fit is, as you describe in the first chapter. I think that's really important. I do have just a few questions for you. So to give people time, so if you do, anyone in the audience, if you have questions for Jaime, the Q&A is down below. Feel free to add your questions and we'll get to them in just a couple moments. So I do have some questions for you. You say now you're working a lot with up and coming small businesses with your newest ventures, including Supermaker and your investment company. What is, something that seems to be a trend with a lot of these companies? Is there anything that comes up repeatedly where people are struggling or they need help? Or do you have any advice that you tend to find yourself giving repeatedly to these individuals?
Yeah, the thing that's funny is that I often end up talking founders out of getting funding, despite that I'm an investor. I think a lot of people try to bring in VC money too soon, but my business is a prime example of one that was bootstrapped and didn't need outside funding. So it is possible to grow without outside capital. Of course, it's a better fit for certain business models, but it's certainly an option for many. And that's one area that I really like to support other entrepreneurs, getting them just to think about maybe scaling their business without giving away equity.
Sounds great. I know this is talked also a lot about in your book, but I just thought maybe for the people in tonight's audience, it would be helpful. Sometimes the maker community has exploded, right? I know Portland, where you are, it's a massive community. It's been like that for a long time. But here in Ohio, we do have quite a few maker movements. We had the Cleveland Flea. We have maker groups in Akron. It's a very large scene. And when you also then incorporate online stores like Etsy and Shopify, you can quickly find yourself in a very saturated market. What tips or 1 or 2 tips would you have to make yourself stand out? You know, how do you get your little shop a voice in the crowd of maybe 100 other people doing the same thing?
Yeah, that's becoming increasingly challenging today, you know, as each industry is getting more saturated, a lot more competitive. What's really key is to just to recognize where you can do something a little bit differently. And that doesn't always mean creating some highly innovative new concept. Sometimes it's just a matter of speaking about your product a little differently. Maybe it's using, you know, packaging or colors or branding that's different from what, you know, the industry is used to. Sometimes it's reaching a customer base that hasn't been tapped into yet. And also reaching different distribution channels that maybe haven't been tapped yet. So I think it's really just about thinking about the industry and the product, you know, differently than it's been thought about before.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. I agree with you. Sometimes you do have to take some risks in order to get the reward. So that does make sense. So that's fantastic. And of course, also in your book, you do talk a lot about the obstacles, as you said. What is the largest obstacle you faced during your challenge from an upstart to, you know, the product it is now known for today? What was the one that it still sticks with you? Do you have one specific obstacle that you go, wow, that happened?
The biggest challenge in general with scaling a company that was growing that fast was being able to forecast, just knowing that what the demand would be, because we were growing just, you know, 400% year over year, and just never really knowing how much product we would need, how much capital we would need, what type of infrastructure might be necessary to continue scaling. You know, so we're moving factories, and we moved 4 times over 3 years. And so it was just never easy and virtually impossible really to be able to predict. That's an issue I talked to a lot of entrepreneurs about today too. You know, they ask what's the magic in understanding demand, and it's not easy. You know, and knowing how much inventory to have on hand, supply chain issues. You don't want to have too much capital tied up in raw materials or finished goods, and so, but also you don't want to run out. So it's, you know, having this balance of finding that right number. And for me, I mentioned too that, you know, we were producing in-house. That adds a whole other level of complication to the business because you're managing everything yourself. You know, so it's these relationships with distributors and suppliers and things. So that complicates matters too.
Wow, that does sound like a lot. And you did grow so fast. And you said you assembled a team, correct? Could you talk a little bit about the process of assembling a team that quickly? What did you look for? How did you find these people?
Well, it started, the first person I hired, I had helping me with production. I, you know, had been making everything myself. I was shipping, I was managing all the emails and just all of it. And so I really wanted help just kind of taking some of the actual hands-on work off my plate. So I had somebody helping with the deodorant production, and then I also hired somebody to help with shipping. So having those two on board right away was a nice way to allow me to focus on the bigger initiatives of the business and really sort of, you know, lead at the CEO level and think about the things I needed to really scale. And then from there, you know, I never really hired a big C-suite. I never had a lot of directors on hand, and I really only had a few managers, but I had good people. My husband, Chris Cantino, he took on our marketing department. You know, he led that along with communications. So that was off my plate. You know, I was engaged, but still knew that it was in good hands with him. I ended up hiring an operations manager so they could oversee back of the house. And so really, you know, we had a very slim staff, but we did a lot with what we had. The majority of our employees for the last couple of years of the business were in the manufacturing department. So we had 2 shifts. So we had 150 people across the whole company at that time.
Wow, that's a lot of people, but they had a lot to output, so that makes complete sense.
Right.
Okay, we do have a few questions that have popped in, you know. So again, if you have questions, you can either use the Q&A. Some people have been using the chat. Either or is fine. With me, I can see all the questions. I'll ask them for you. We do have someone who wants to know, let's see here, what made your brand different from the others that were on the market?
Yeah,
in your eyes.
I'm glad you asked. So my goal was really to create a natural product that was as effective as some of these conventional brands. Natural at the time had a reputation for just not working as well. So that was my biggest goal. And I succeeded at that. You know, it was just so much work that went into formulating my recipe, but I was able to pull it off. And then also our branding at the time was really different from other deodorant brands that were on the shelves. That was really eye-catching. And the fragrances too. I did a lot of innovating in different scents, Really passionate about essential oils. So I was able to create these beautiful fragrances that didn't yet exist on the market. I got a little adventurous there. I was doing things that other brands weren't doing. I think it's a combination of those. And then our marketing too, that kicked in pretty early on. And we had some really strategic and interesting ways to market. We had an ad strategy that was really effective. And so all these things combined. Word of mouth was really powerful in the earliest years. We had just customers talking about the product and how much they loved it. We had some influencers who willingly jumped on the bandwagon early, just doing what they could to get the word out.
And then because you were growing this from the ground up and you were taking risks compared to what deodorants you see on the shelf, like Secret or whatnot, did you do like any feedback work? Like, did you test people, see what they liked about the scents? Could you talk a little bit about maybe, the process you were using for that?
Yeah, the farmers markets in the earliest years were beautiful for that because I had basically these focus groups right in front of me. So I would talk to customers, get their feedback in the moment, and that was really valuable. As the company scaled, I was no longer at these markets, and so we had to come up with different ways to stay connected to the customer. Ways we could do that were through surveys and email and social media, just always paying attention to customer feedback, tracking patterns in customer response. So if we kept hearing a common complaint or a common request, really paying attention to where those patterns lie and then responding that way.
That's very smart. It sounds like so much to do. And Joe in the chat wants to know, how do you maintain energy and an effective focus? I have a feeling part of this has to do with your team, but how do you personally, how do you make do and get everything you need done in a day?
I think what's most important is just knowing what the priority is, and being willing to shift gears very quickly. You might think you have your day planned out or what the goals you want to accomplish that week, but things will change and there'll be things that come up and obstacles that you were not expecting. So it's really just a flexibility, but also I guess a short-term thinking that really served me well. I refused to look too far ahead. Because for me that was personally very overwhelming. I might kind of freeze up in my thinking and not even know how to go about my plan for tackling my goals. So for me it was really just what's happening today or tomorrow, and then what do I need to do to make that happen.
Mm-hmm. Now, let's see. One of the most important things, obviously, to get people to purchase your product is people have to be aware of your product. And marketing is key. We talked about a little bit with, how congested it can be today to get your word out. But Julianne wants to know a little bit more specifically with Schmidt's Naturals. How much of your marketing was dedicated to social media, reaching out to bloggers versus traditional print or other media?
A lot of it was digital, but it was a mix. So this was back, in the early 2010s when Facebook ads were very affordable. They weren't used by many brands, so that was a really interesting way for us to reach a lot of customers, and not everybody was doing it yet. That cost to buy the ads was cheap. We did a lot of Google advertising. We would test out different messaging to see what resonated best with our customers. So for example, we might have 5 to 10 or more different ads out at the same time, and just really paying attention to which ones the customers are responding to the most. We'd be surprised sometimes too, because we have these assumptions about our target customer, who we think our product user is, but then we see different results based on who's responding to the ads and who's which ads are converting to sales. So really just paying attention to those metrics, that was really key for us.
Right. Now, obviously, 2010 social media was a completely different animal. As you said, advertising was much cheaper on social media. I do part of the library's marketing, so I am aware of how expensive it can be to do social media ads and whatnot. Looking back, what would you think would you do something different targeted? If you had if you were starting today, Schmidt's Naturals, with the costs it is for marketing, or do you think you would do a similar tactic?
I think we would test all sorts of different tactics. One thing that was also really effective for us was not just the marketing strategy, but the distribution strategy. From day one, wanted our products to be available to as many people as possible. And that meant an omni-channel approach. So if you don't know what that means, it's all distribution channels, right? So not just your website, but also retailers, e-com. A lot of brands will choose just to stay, direct to consumer on their website. But for me, it was really important to sell not just in retailers locally or small independents, but everywhere. So big box, every chain that I could get my product into. That was really key too. And then basing a lot of our marketing efforts on the retail distribution. So for example, when Schmidt's launched in Target, we put out marketing messaging that said, hey, you can now find our products in the Target nearest you. And we had really sophisticated tools to help us geo-target some of these customers that were close to the stores.
Gotcha. Now, I do also believe in your book you do talk about sustainability, because I believe Schmidt's wasn't only just a completely natural, so aluminum, paraben free. I believe it has 14 ingredients in it, if I'm correct.
We have a few different formulas, but the goal with formulating Schmidt's was that every ingredient served a purpose.
Right.
Yeah, we didn't use any fillers. And Domenico asked what type of products. So it was personal care products. The product we were most known for was our deodorant, a natural deodorant. Over the years, we added more products, but it took some time before I was willing to expand on our product offerings. And I'll talk about that briefly if I can. When I first went to these farmers markets that I spoke about earlier, I had a whole assortment. I had lotions, I had soaps and sunscreens, but I really understood that to have impact in the industry and to really be to be seen and noticed by retailers, I had to do one thing and do it really well. So I chose deodorant because that's where I saw the greatest opportunity. And that was a really effective strategy. And I always encourage founders who are starting brands to really hone in on your product and really see if you can bring it down to just one or two products. And then from there, once you have your customer loyalty and you've established a fan base, then you can build out more products and you can build your product roadmap based on what these customers want to see next from you. So we paid really close attention to what we were hearing from customers. They were asking for things like soaps and toothpaste, and later we were able to produce those and do it with confidence because we knew there were people that wanted to buy it.
Right. So Schmidt's, it's not only all natural, it is cruelty free, and it's also sustainable. You do talk a little bit about sustainability, I believe, at the end of your book, Supermaker. What advice would you have for a company with respect to, environmentalism or sustainability with today's climate? I mean, we have a lot to talk about with like plastics and, other hazardous chemicals or non-biodegradable packaging, things like that. Do you have any advice for businesses or anything regarding those types of issues facing entrepreneurs?
I think most importantly, know what your values are and being able to really identify and articulate those early in the business. And it doesn't always have to mean that you satisfy every standard for sustainability and cruelty free. It's maybe not all of those are for every brand. So it's what's important to you, what makes sense for your brand and your customer and your personal values. And then once you've established those, you're really letting those dictate and guide everything that you do. And knowing, where you're not willing to flex. As our businesses grow, we do have to be open to doing things differently and new opportunities that might, come into play, but really knowing your values, what's most important to you, and then sticking by those, when it's most important. And for some brands, sustainability is a huge one. I just had an interview recently with the CEO of Seventh Generation. I mean, if any brand is walking that walk, it's a brand like Seventh Generation. I mean, they just, they have a mission and just big goals for the company that are truly going to have an impact on the environment. And it's just so cool to see people living out that mission through their brand. And it's not for everybody, but for the ones that it is, it's amazing.
Right. Fantastic. Jaime, do you have any final thoughts for the entrepreneurs? Because I'm sure that I would be willing to guess we do have a strong entrepreneur community here in Hudson. I have a feeling that everyone in the audience, even if they've been a little quiet tonight, they're entrepreneurs in some industry. What advice or what final thoughts do you have for our entrepreneurs moving forward, maybe with terms of COVID or with what's been going on today? Give us your thoughts.
Yeah, I think really maintaining an open mind and ability to be flexible, especially in an economy like we're in today, is really key. I think about, product roadmaps and what we're putting out into the world, and what's really going to be important is understanding what your customer really wants right now. And that might mean stepping back from your plan and just reassessing things, talking to your customers, having an open dialogue. And I think too, if it's a products business, really having one key product that's really practical that you can fall back on, maybe building from there. I think it's just, there's a humbleness and a humanness too that has to come into your business and leading it, because these times that we're in right now, I mean, no one knows what we're up against really. And so I think just having that open, sort of transparent dialogue with your customers is really special and really, really necessary.
Right.
Yeah, and I'll add to that too briefly that, content is really important right now. If you are a brand or service company, whatever it might be, putting out content that supports the goals of your business and really expanding beyond just trying to sell a product. So maybe it's a blog, or as the founder, you are authoring articles just to show your thought leadership and your understanding of the industry, and really teaching customers something beyond trying to sell them a product.
Absolutely. And there's a whole science behind content marketing, I'm aware. And we've had some really great content marketers come in the past to talk with the library, including like Joe Pulizzi. He's a fantastic content marketer. So thank you so much. I know you finished the deal, even though you're still part with them, you're moved on to other things with your investing and with your Supermaker media corporation. I think those are fantastic. I think there's gonna be more exciting things coming down the pike with you. I can't wait to hear about them. And for everyone in the audience, remember, copies of Jaime's book are available for purchase, Supermaker, courtesy of the Learned Owl. I don't have a copy with me because our library copy is checked out with a long hold list. So I was unable to get it. But there are copies available with the Learned Owl. So Jaime, thank you for taking some time to talk with us this evening. It was a pleasure meeting you.
Of course. Thank you so much.
All right. Good night, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for coming tonight, and take care.
Bye. Thank you.
Goodbye.